just started it.
Sherry's got it.
All right, good deal. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We're here for the Water Use Advisory Council. First thing that we've got on our agenda today is to do roll call, and hopefully you all know me by now, but I'll introduce myself first. I'm Laura Campbell. I'm one of your co-chairs for the Water Use Advisory Council. I've got Brian Burrows and Brian Eggers, my other two co-chairs, who are logging in remotely. I see their smiling faces on the camera, so hello. And what we'll do first of all for roll call, which is kind of the first item on our agenda, is I'm going to start with the folks in the room and ask them to identify themselves. And I'm going to go participate. The phone, I'm going to ask. I'll call your name, or if you're logging in under a different name, please do clarify and let me know, okay?
Laura, you're fading out every now and then when you're speaking.
Sorry about that. I'll try to make sure and speak up. I'll use my outdoor voice. Thanks for the heads up. All right, so we'll start. First of all, we'll ask the folks in the room to identify themselves, and everybody use your outside voice. Doug, do we want to start with you?
Yeah. Doug Needham with the Aggregate Association.
Pat Staskevich with American Waterworks Association.
I'm Christine Spitzley with OHM Advisors.
Christine Alexander, Eagle.
Dave Hamilton representing the Nature Conservancy.
Christopher Gothberg, Eagle.
Jim Mill, Eagle. Austin York, Eagle.
All right, great. Thanks, folks. And then I'm going to go down the list and call out names that I'm seeing here on the participant list. So again, if you're logging in under a different name, please do let me know, correct me. And I'm going to start with this phone number here. Phone number ending in 16. Can you identify yourself?
Hi, Laura. It's Kelly Turner from the Potato Commission. Hi. I'm tuning in today from Heartland, Michigan.
Awesome. Is the most recent update to our requirements under the Open Meetings Act is you don't have to list your location, which is why I'm just going to kind of run down the name of list so we can get through this pretty timely. And again, make sure and correct me if I either don't call you or if I'm calling the wrong name from your computer. So I've got Hannah Arnett, Jeremiah Asher, Simon Belisle. I've got Brian Burrows, C. Dugan. Who's that?
Clyde Dugan.
Clyde Dugan. All right.
Clyde Dugan.
James Clift, Emily Finnell, Frank Edwagishik. We've got Chris, who's here in the room, Ralph Hefner, Ross Helmer, Joel Henry, Jacob Souter, Jim Nicholas, John Yelich. Kelly, you already identified yourself. Andy LeBaron. Mike Gallagher, Jim Milnes here in the room, Alyssa Olson, Lena Pappas, Pat Staskevich, who's here. Wait,
I logged in too.
you logged in. Okay. You confused me for a minute. All right. Teresa Seidel, Stephen Kohler, Sherry Phelan, Ben Terrell, Town Frazier, Austin York, Troy Zorn, and Adam Zwickel. And Rachel Proctor did let us know she was going to be late today, so she'll be joining us a little bit later. Is there anybody I missed? Anybody whose name I did not call?
Laura, this is Dave Lush. I'm signed in on Teams.
You, Dave?
Laura, it's Mike Frederick. I'm here, and Buddy is going to be running about 30 minutes late, but I believe he is still coming.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other names that I missed? All right, awesome. So with Open Meetings Act, we do not have quorum here today. We would need 9 in person of voting members to have quorum. So we are going to not approve the agenda or the minutes. Although as an informal note, if you guys see the agenda that's on your screen right here, if there's anything that you want to add to it, I think that's fine, that we can just work by consensus to add something to the agenda to make sure that we're not missing anything that anybody wants to talk about.
Yeah, real quick, Laura, this is Tom Frazier. Just wondered if we could do a quick update on the legislative budget issue and where we wound up with that.
Sure. You caught us there, Tom, because the reason we took it off the agenda is there's not really an update, but we can make sure and mention it.
Okay.
The short answer is the bill is still in the House Appropriations Committee, and we're fingers crossed waiting for it to advance. It has passed the Senate and it's got to get through the House.
All right. Thank you very much.
I do not have updates on whether there's any serious discussion about the amounts of money appropriated in that bill changing or any amendments coming through. I haven't heard any information about that, but if there's anybody on who has more updated information or who has had some of those conversations, absolutely, please speak up. All right, I'm hearing none. So unfortunately, you know, I don't know whether we can call no news is good news at this point, but no news at least means that we don't have the money yet, but it's still moving through the process. And we are watching that to see what happens with that or to see if there's any further discussion. Anything else that, I guess, since we're now to the part where we would ask for public comment anyway, anything else that anybody wants to chat about, anything agenda related, or anything that you want to make sure that we're considering in the discussion today during the meeting? And don't forget, if you are trying to speak, you may need to unmute yourself in order to speak. I am seeing none here. So at this point, I think what I need to do is, we are past our roll call. We cannot do approval of minutes. We've done public comment. Next is going to be committee chair reports, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Brian.
Right. Thank you, Laura. Happy 2022 to everybody. Hope the year's starting out better than 2021 for everyone. I will start off our committee reports with the data committee update. Yep, there you go. So we have not been meeting for a while now. We'll be scheduling a series of next meetings. But really where we had left off is on our last report to the legislature, we had two things of work that the committee needs to address, and that was doing some assessment of all of our different data protocols and use standards and documentation. And we had started that, not got too far, and we need to kind of pick back up on that as something that we were going to do internally. We also had begun trying to revisit yet again the Lakes ARI assessment platforms and spent a little time trying to learn about what Wisconsin did and which parts of that might be useful to us. We still need to pick back up on that and have some good discussions about what we need to do as next steps, whatever those are and however rudimentary they may be. We need to kind of lay out a pathway forward for ourselves. And I think that's an important thing to do for the next report due at the end of this year. So that's kind of the work in front of us. But honestly, we were also sort of bracing, maybe partially or naively expecting that some of the appropriations might happen. if those appropriations do happen, our committee will have quite a bit of work and involvement required to implement most of the recommendations that the committee made. So we're kind of always have that looming in the future to do an awful lot of work on that. So at this point, we'll be scheduling some more meetings, and our key needs there are to regroup and develop some work plans, priorities, and volunteers for some of that work that's in front of us. And that's it. Does anybody have any quick questions on the data committee at this point? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I will move along and invite, I think, Dave Hamilton to give a models committee update, and or Jim.
Okay, so the main thing we want to use our time today talking about is downstream accounting. This is a really important issue that we've been talking about for a long time. It was included in our 2014 recommendations. It's something that should be done. And the idea is that when we have a withdrawal in a water management area, it's only withdrawing from that area. There's no deduction as you move downstream. It doesn't carry downstream at all in our current system. And so some of our members of the council, some interest groups have been concerned about that basically since the beginning. And DNR actually decided to do something about it, start investigating this. So Troy Zorn has chaired a group looking at it. You may recognize Troy's name because he was very involved in the development of the original process. So Troy developed the fish response curves that are at the heart of our methodology. And so he's, he understands this process, understands what we're trying to do here. And he spent actually 4 years now with a group looking at how can we handle this downstream accounting. So we're going to divide this presentation into two parts. He's going to explain what they did and what the overall results were from their effort. And then I will take it, and I took the results and I looked at 2 watersheds to give us examples so we could dig into and say, what does this mean? What do the numbers look like for us? Which I think is probably something a little easier for us to get a handle on. So Troy's going to start. Troy, if you're ready, go ahead.
Thanks for the introduction, Dave. Could you, let's see, I'll request control so I can run the clicker.
I think you're going to have to say, take the next slide. Yep.
Oh, okay. So we're just gonna, first I wanted to acknowledge the co-authors who really did a lot of the heavy lifting on the data analysis end of it. Dr. Dana Infante at Michigan State University and her workers, Jared Ross and Hao Yu and Andy LeBaron provided the stream flow depletion data, which was critical for our analysis. And then the other members on the committee, and I can't see all the names since we're on the next slide, but if you got the report, they're all listed on the report, and they all shared their expertise and knowledge, and just want to appreciate their contributions. So we're just going to kind of dive right into it. First, I'll give you some background. First, a discussion of, we're going to talk about watersheds and catchments. And for purposes of our discussion, these two terms are pretty much interchangeable. We'll define them as the area that drains water to a specific location on a stream. So the red dot in each of those images, the circle outlined in purple defines the watershed for that stream. You can go to the next bullet. Yep. So properties measured at the watershed scale collectively shape the physical and biological characteristics at the site. And so, for example, things like the watershed's area, the climate that occurs over the watershed's geology, its topography, those control how quickly water is routed to streams, land use in the watershed, and the surface, the glacial deposits influence infiltration of water versus runoff, and surface and groundwater uses also can affect the stream's characteristics at a site. You can go to the next. And so the index flow estimates in the water withdrawal assessment program are predicted, I think, almost entirely from watershed scale variables. Watershed area is a key one. Aquifer transmissivity, forest cover, annual precipitation, and soil permeability are all quantified at the watershed scale for predicting index flows. Next. So what's happening throughout the watershed can influence, has potential to have an important influence on large quantity, including large quantity withdrawals can have an important influence on flow conditions at a site. You can go to the next one. So now we'll get into cumulative effects and watersheds in the program. So when a new large quantity withdrawal is proposed, the watershed withdrawal assessment program looks at adjacent water management areas. So when we're looking at a withdrawal in this area in orange, down here in the lower left part of that map, the program looks at the adjacent water management areas. Those are the ones in light orange. And so if it's a small system that's made up of 1 or 2 water management areas, that type of accounting can keep track of everything that's going on at the watershed scale. But a lot of our systems are quite a bit bigger. And this map we're looking at here, you can, I think, click on the next one, is the Muskegon River at Everett. And so here, this water management area in orange is actually, its watershed includes all that area in green, but none of what's going on in that area in green is included. So that most of the watershed is really ignored. And if you had a zone D condition at the red dot there, that would be ignored too if it occurred when we're evaluating what's going on at that lower water management area in terms of water availability. That's potentially problematic. So for larger streams, by ignoring what's going on as far as flow depletions in more than one water management areas distance upstream, the program is essentially restoring the index flow as downstream water management areas are passed. And so the main channel's index flow could be reduced to ARI levels at multiple intervals along its length. And those flow reductions would just keep being erased as you go downriver. And that's what those red dots indicate. So for example, if we're looking at this orange area again, and we had a 130 CFS flow depletion, which is the amount of flow that can be taken out before you reach zone D. If we went down to the next water management area downstream, that flow would be entirely restored. And it has me and others, I think, questioning if this current approach is scientifically defensible and robust, particularly for larger rivers. Next. So if this is the case for larger systems, a water withdrawal assessment program could suggest that more water is available than true because upstream flow depletions in much of the watershed are ignored. And as Dave Hamilton mentioned, this was identified early on by the Technical Underpinnings Work Group. And so assessing cumulative effects is potentially a widespread issue. And hopefully some of these data down here will help to demonstrate it. So what we're looking at on the left side are bar charts showing the number of water management areas that have a given number of upstream water management areas that contribute to them. Note that about 4,100 or so water management areas are headwaters, so they don't have any contributing water management areas. And then 350 water management areas have just one water management area above them. So those are your smaller ones. But then when you get down to these medium-sized rivers that have 6 to 10 water management areas above them, there's over 200 of those. And rivers that have 51 to 100 water management areas upstream of them, there's over 50 of those. So if you look at the map on the right, you can see that a lot of the the larger river systems in the state are comprised of many water management areas. It's 20 to 50 to 100 or more water management areas that flow into them. So the current program, when it's looking at one of these larger river systems, looking at upstream withdrawals, a very large portion of what's going on in that watershed is ignored. 80 to 90% at times. And these in my mind are the kind of the high value systems that people value for fishing, community recreation, canoeing, that type of thing. You know, they're the rivers that people know by name and talk about. They're not just little tiny creeks. Let's go to the next one. So this, it seemed problematic, but there seemed like there's a solution in reach. Watershed scale accounting, looking at things at the whole watershed scale, it would be consistent with current hydrologic modeling and landscape ecology principles. You know, it would be consistent with the models that were used to predict index flows for the program. Such accounting would be aligned with the intent and spirit of the Great Lakes Compact. You know, the intent is to prevent cumulative downstream cumulative effects. This type of accounting could improve and increase the validity of the program if done, you know, properly, and it seems feasible. And there are resources to do that. And so Dr. Dana Infante at Michigan State University, she's a landscape ecologist that has done stream work at the watershed scale throughout Michigan and actually at the continental scale for the continental United States. And so she has staff at her lab that are well versed in working with large watershed systems. The Eagle's stream flow depletion database existed, and that was kept up in good shape by Andy LeBaron. DNR had access to a small amount of funding through the state wildlife grant, and we were able to leverage that with these resources to look at this. So our objectives were to demonstrate the feasibility of incorporating watershed scale accounting in the water withdrawal assessment program. And by doing this, we'd probably expect that there would be less water available in downstream water management areas because the current system assumes that it's all returned. Our second objective is to incorporate water use sector-specific return rates of withdrawn water into the stream flow depletion accounting process. And currently, withdrawn water is assumed to be entirely removed from the system. So by returning some, there potentially would be more water available. Next. And then finally is to depict the status of Michigan water management areas following such changes. So there's some tables and maps depicting how things look when we did that. Next slide. So getting into the methods, as I mentioned earlier, we acquired the data from Eagle. Andy was instrumental in that. And that included flow depletion totals for each water management area with individual values adjusted using water sector specific return flow percentages. And the table below shows the return flow rates that we used. They were from work done by Schaffer and Runkle as reported in Schaffer 2009. And so industry, for example, would return 90% of its flow. Domestic and public supply returned 88% of its flow, and then irrigation, on the other hand, returned about 10% of its flow. Topological rate relationships among water management areas were developed for Michigan River networks, and that was done through Dana's lab's expertise. And so what they did is they reviewed that topological coding and then recoded things to look upstream so we could capture what's going on in the entire watershed. And then they ran the aggregation coding to sum all of the flow depletions upstream of each water management area in the state. Next slide. So what we're looking at here is a sum table from the report that we've produced summarizing this effort. And this table is for all of the water management areas that had at least one water management area upstream. And this looks at the effects of these changes as we implemented them. So if you look at the column on the left, that's the stream size class, and we divided it into 6 categories. So these would be streams that had 1 to 4 management areas upstream. So these are your smaller creeks, and then getting into larger systems, some having 11 to 25 water management areas upstream, some with 26 to 50. And if I remember right, you know, these 26 to 50 group included rivers like the Huron River in Ann Arbor, the Grand River around Lansing, the Asable River, upstream of Mayo. So those are your kind of mid to large size rivers, and then some that were quite large. And so highlighted in yellow looks at the situation under this. This is the current condition without return flows and with no watershed scale accounting. And you can see that from the calculations that we did, and I should mention that the calculations that our team did not reflect site-specific reviews or, any finer scale analysis. This was kind of just, taken directly from the data. But so for these smaller systems, the smaller 2 size classes, we counted 5 water management areas in Zone D, very small percentage. If you go to the right, when return flows were applied, only 2 water management areas were in Zone D. So as expected, more water became available. And then going from the top left there, without return flows going down, when we added watershed scale accounting, you can see that considerably more water management areas came into Zone D, especially for these larger size classes, where with the current system, all of those, the 4 larger size classes, there were no Zone D situations there. And then when we added return flows to get to the values highlighted in yellow, the return flows made more water available, so there were fewer watersheds in Zone D. So kind of as expected, we did see more systems in Zone D, particularly for the larger size classes where we thought that undercounting effects could be most notable. Next slide. Seeing how this plays out on a map. On the left, these are flow depletions by water management area before and after watershed scale accounting and return flows. So on the left, these are the before. So these are kind of the calculations under the current conditions, and you can see relatively low depletions in each water management areas. Each water management area, probably maybe the darkest ones were in the 13 to 29 CFS of flow removed from that water management area. If we go to the after scenario, when we start accumulating these upstream effects, you start to see considerably more levels of flow depletion. As river systems get larger and drain more water management areas, more flow depletions, those flow depletions can start to accumulate. So when you're getting down into, say the St. Joe here or the lower Saginaw, I can't see the colors too well from my computer, but you're talking about a cumulative effect of maybe, up to 120 to 100 to 200 or so CFS. And that's, again, just the raw calculations. It does not affect site-specific reviews and that type of thing. Next slide. Potential Zone D water management areas before and after watershed accounting and return flows. That's what these 2 maps show. And the map on the left shows under the current system, no downstream accounting, no return flows. There's this number of Zone Ds. I can't remember the number, but the idea is that when we added return flows and watershed scale accounting, we do see more watersheds that are, starting to hit that threshold, and ones that might be of interest or worth looking into. You can go to the next slide. Kind of related to that last image of after watershed scale accounting and return flows. This map shows in red the Zone D watersheds, and then in orange all the watersheds upstream of those Zone D watersheds. So those upstream watersheds in combination may potentially be contributing to the Zone D condition, or it's what's happening within the individual water management area. That's where the issue is. But so it kind of shows regions that might be worth looking at a little bit more. Next one. One of the things we discuss a little bit in our report is there are some challenges to field documentation of withdrawal efforts, and I've heard people talk about this. Ideally, you'd be able to look at long-term gauges and see these things, but as I think a number of us know that have looked at this a little bit more closely, the numbers of gauges are not nearly as high as anyone wishes they would be, and the locations are kind of problematic. A lot of the rivers in the state, if you go to the UP, a lot of these rivers have just 1 gauge per river. Some of the gauges in the lower peninsula are upstream or downstream of dams. They're not strategically located for evaluating these type of effects. The other issue is documentation of withdrawal activities. and we've talked about this in our committee, it's probably not rigorous enough to really have a good handle on it. Also, the permits, I think, what's in the system are the amount of withdrawals that people are, the maximum amount that they're registered to withdraw. And it doesn't necessarily reflect actual withdrawals, so that's doesn't make things too easy. A big factor is that the state of Michigan, it has hydrologically complex landscapes. The geology of the state is highly variable. The topography is variable. So it's not you can't necessarily apply what you're seeing in one area to another area and have it work out perfectly. Things just aren't that simple. And then another factor that kind of is really important to consider is spatial temporal climatic variation. And so what this map shows, and I'll get into it in a second here, as you all know, the Great Lakes have been high the last several years, and things have been wet lately. The graph here on the left shows from the National Weather Service, the Grand Rapids mean annual precipitation. And I summarized it for 2 periods. So the first period is 1971 to 2000, and that is the baseline period that was used for predicting index flows for all the sites in the state. So these are the index flow predictions for all the water management areas. So what was used during that period was the mean average precipitation was 37. If we look at the last decade, the mean annual precipitation is about a little over 4 inches higher. So there's more water in the landscape that there was. So, the expectation that we should see things considerably lower may not necessarily be valid. If you look at this, so what this map over on the right shows are USGS gauges and what their index flows were, or how their index flows during this baseline 1971 to 2000 period compares with the index flows during the most recent decade, 2010 to 2019. And you can see that in the northern half of the state, the index flows are often 15 to as much as 60 or so percent below what they used to be back in that earlier period, which was used to estimate index flows for the water management program. If you look at the southern part of the state, we all know about some of the floods that have happened. A lot of these rivers are at higher index flows than what occurred in that baseline period. Oftentimes 15 to 60% higher. And so these aren't, comparing the 2 periods the 2 periods are not necessarily comparable. One thing that does catch my eye as we look at this, why don't you go to the next slide? I think we should go to the next one if I remember. Oh, so so when we look at the annual runoff, and this graph is for looking at the period from 1955 to 2004. This is from a report by Hodgkins et al. It's done by the USGS. These are USGS gauges, and they looked at total runoff across this long period, 1955 to 2004. And they also showed that basically in the Southern Great Lakes watershed, across the board, there's greater runoff at these USGS gauges than in more recent years than earlier years. And then again, in the northern part of the basin, things look a little bit drier. You see some red dots. The green dots, if they're there, they're relatively small. So things do appear to be wetter in the south, drier in the north, which is kind of consistent with those baseline. Some of the changes we look. Go to the next slide. This will maybe help a little bit more. So as you can see, looking at your graph on the right, it certainly is drier across the board in the north. Down in the south, there's a little bit more of a mixed bag, but for the most part, it's wetter in the south. What catches my eye as we look at this, you look in Southwest Michigan, maybe click on the thing. Are these gauges that are shown here? You can see a number of gauges where there's a minimal increase or they're in red. And this is in an area of the state, as we looked at the previous couple slides, where things should have been wetter. And on the whole, they have been getting wetter. And this tends to coincide pretty well with the area where we are currently seeing some Zone D predictions, or areas that are potentially contributing to that. In my mind, that's quite a compelling coincidence and something I would consider looking at in more detail. Why don't you go to the next slide, please?
Ask a question on that. So what is actually happening on that part of the state? It does seem like an anomaly. Is it the geography down there? Is there more industry down there? What is taking place there?
There's more irrigation.
Okay,
I mean, that's the epicenter for irrigation of the state.
just curious. Thanks.
This map, I just specifically showed up these gauges that are pretty interesting. And you can see it's the St. Joe River, 3 sites in the St. Joe River. One of the gauges is Hog Creek, which is a tributary of the St. Joe River, Prairie River, also tributary of the St. Joe River, and then Augusta Creek, I think up here, which is near Augusta, Michigan. So yeah, these kind of are anomalies, and seems pretty curious to me, and I think there might be a reason for that, but probably could take a little bit deeper dive into that to confirm things further. Anyways, go to the next slide. So in summary, I think our effort demonstrated that cumulative withdrawals and return flows can be readily incorporated into the water withdrawal assessment program. It's technically feasible. I think currently what we have are the current system has essentially no cumulative withdrawals at the watershed scale. And what we did in this exercise is essentially 100% cumulative withdrawals. And the truth may lie somewhere in between that. But I think what we demonstrated is that the technical ability is there to do it, and it's achieving it is the nuance of how to do it perfectly and to do the best possible job is maybe the next step. Anyway, nevertheless, we think this information can help fill a key knowledge gap. Cumulative withdrawal information can also aid in identifying areas for further examination. Next. I think from our group's perspective, we've accomplished our charge, did what we set out to do. We think further consideration of the issues warranted. We presented this to the models committee, and it's up for their consideration, and we're doing the same with you today. And next slide. So I think that's about all I have for today, and I appreciate your time and consideration, and just leave with a quote that seems pretty relevant to our discussions. This is from Hamilton and Seelbach's report describing the water withdrawal assessment program. And I guess I'll just, I'm open to questions or discussion or wherever the moderator wants to take it next. Thank you.
My questions for Troy, what he did, this would be a good time to ask. I'm going to go into some examples. So if you want to know more about what it means, I say hold on. But if you have questions for what Troy did, this is a good time to ask.
I guess one thing I want to make sure to bring up, and having been part of this work group, we had a lot of discussions about that. And that is kind of this notion of withdrawals bringing a watershed into Zone D, which is not legally allowed under the current water withdrawal assessment tool. So I want to sort of put some caveats around the discussion of, hey, here's all these watersheds that, that have these withdrawals that are putting them in Zone D. I mean, right now, water withdrawal can't be approved that puts a watershed in Zone D. So I think that there's some particular points to the language and how this is presented and how our understanding of this should work to help us understand that while we're looking at this from a modeling perspective and saying, hey, if we're not calculating these downstream effects, we could be, accidentally putting stuff into a Zone D. I don't want that to then create the understanding that, hey, there's a bunch of water withdrawals that have been approved out there that have already put these upstream water management areas into Zone D, because that's not allowed. So not so much a question, just a clarification, because we went back and forth around through this multiple times in the work group.
That's a good point. And nothing of this presentation is to say that anything else is in Zone D. It's saying if this methodology was applied, this is what it would say. So we need to keep that in mind. So that's a good point.
Jim Nichols raised his hand.
Hi, thanks, Troy. I'm sorry I missed the Models Committee meeting. This week I had to travel unexpectedly. It looks like great work. Just one comment and a question or clarification. The increases, I think it was from USGS work of in annual runoff. I guess it should be clear to people that that doesn't necessarily mean an increase in index flow, because the annual runoff increases could be just from large storms and events like that, rather than what you see in sustained kind of low flows in the summer. And the second is just clarification on the time period that the original index flows were computed on. It said 71 to 2000, and I thought the period of record was used for gauges, which for some could go back 70 years. But I could be wrong on that. Just wanted to clarify.
Right, I guess maybe I should have clarified. I meant the predictions for the sites where there weren't gauges. Maybe I guess I should let Dave Hamilton speak to that.
So what Troy was referring to is that in the regression analysis, it used mean annual precipitation. That was one of the inputs into the regression. That time period that he showed was the time period that was used. So in that sense, the regression equation was based on that time period. But Jim, you're also right, because all of the calculations of index flows at gauges were based on the entire period of record. And when we do site-specific reviews and when we were comparing, how did the regression do, we were using the entire period of record at gauges for the analysis. So both are true. You just have to understand what it means to the study. So regression equation, that time period is what was used in developing that regression. For gauge analysis, the entire period of record is used.
Okay, thank you.
And in our analysis, we sought to have a consistent baseline across all gauges for making those comparisons between time periods. So that's why we, approached it the way that we did.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions for Troy, let's move on to the next presentation. And next slide. So what I want to do is talk about what does this mean? And two very important watersheds in the state are Kalamazoo and St. Joe relative to this program. And the St. Joe, because that's where there's far more irrigation down in that watershed than anywhere else in the state. And so I think for us to understand, if we apply this methodology, what does it mean? I think it helps us to dig into these watersheds to look at that. So what I've done is I pulled out a few places. First, we'll start on the Kalamazoo. And these are a few different locations on the Kalamazoo River itself. And so it shows you what the drainage area is, what the water management area number is at the mouth of whatever section I'm looking at there, what the index flow is in gallons per minute, and then what type of stream it is, whether it's cold transitional, cool small river, or warm small river. And those are important because that classification is what determined how do you determine what is an ARI, how do you determine whether it's in zone A, B, C, or D. And that's what the next columns are for. So the first one is zone B. It says 0. That's because in cold transitional, there is no zone A. You're automatically put into zone B. If you look at the next one, it says 15%. So the first 15% of the index flow that's depleted, you're going to be in zone A. Once you hit 15%, you're going to be kicked over into zone B. If you move to the next one, once you take out 19%, that's going to kick you into zone D. And then if you take out 25%, that'll kick you into zone D. Any questions on that? Because that's a really important thing. That's how our system works. That's how the accounting works right now. Okay. So then the next column, so those percentages are established in legislation. Those are what the legislature said. These are the allowable depletions in water management areas in this program. And then the next set of columns show what it is in gallons per minute. So you can go back and look at what was the index flow and what is the depletion. So what's under the WWAT depletion, that's what's in the system now. So if you went and you looked at the depletion table, the accounting table that's used in the system in March of last year, these are the numbers that you would have come up with. So for the South Branch Kalamazoo at the location here, almost 76 square miles, the depletion in the county system is 433 gallons per minute. The next one down is 279 gallons per minute. The North Branch was 108 gallons per minute. So in those water management areas at the mouth of these streams, that's the total amount of depletion that's in the accounting system. One other thing that I'd like to clarify from what Troy was saying is he says that the current system looks at neighboring water management areas. It only looks at it in the sense of, do I make a depletion from neighbors? So the well is in a home watershed, and doing the calculation for total depletion, it looks at all of the neighboring water management areas and determines, should I take any water out of that? And that's where the half max rule comes into play, which we talked about a couple of meetings ago. So just to be clear, the system does not look at how much was depleted in a neighboring water management area. It looks at, should I take more depletion from it? Now, if it triggered a zone D, then that would flag the withdrawal and say, hey, wait a minute, you're potentially causing an ARI in this neighboring area. We've got to do a site-specific review. All right. So the next column then is applying all of the methodology that Troy laid out. So it's accumulating all depletions as you move your way downstream. So any depletions are taken in any water management area that's upstream of this one, gets them all together. It also says
If someone's not muted their system, can you mute that?
okay. So the next one is the net depletion with return flow. So accumulating all of the depletions from the upstream areas, water management area that we're looking at here, and adding in all the return flows. Now, if you look at the one that's kind of in the middle, the Battle Creek River, it's interesting because it shows that under the current depletion, it's at 620, adding in net total depletions and return flows down to 15, which when I first saw it, I thought it was a mistake, but it does show that return flows can actually reduce the amount of depletion you would have carrying it forward like that. So this was an example of one where that's the case, where it's showing that there will be a smaller amount of depletion because of return flows. So in that particular watershed, it's not heavy in irrigation, it's heavier more in commercial, industrial, municipal water users. Oh, another thing of the study that we need to be aware of is that it did not look at withdrawals that are before the beginning of this system. It's only looking at what are the recent withdrawals that are in this system. So it didn't look at historic withdrawals. It's only looking at new ones that are registered in this system. And then the last two columns are to show what zone the water management area would be in. So currently, almost all of them are in A, just the top one is cold transitional. It can't be higher than B. By statute, it's in zone B for a starting point. Then when you add in the results of this process, it affects them, some of them more than others. The first one would kick it into D, a couple of them go into zone B, and some of the others are large enough that they would stay in zone A. So this is an example of what's happening in Kalamazoo. I'm going to show you some maps so you get a feel for what it looks like on maps. But these are the numbers. So are there any questions on how these numbers are calculated or what these numbers mean? All right, next slide. So this is looking at the upper Kalamazoo. So 10-13 is the North Branch of Kalamazoo, 10-535 is the South Branch of Kalamazoo. So those are the two branches coming together. The area that's all colored, that was the top one that I had, the top row. So the red zone is a cold transitional one, has a number of water management areas upstream of it. And the cumulative effect of adding the system would have kicked that into zone D. Next slide. This is moving further downstream, so it picks up the Battle Creek River, which is 456 or something like that. And then Kalamazoo River itself coming into Battle Creek. So it picks up those, and those are ones that it didn't change those water management areas. But you notice there's some other water management areas in that watershed that are being affected by this methodology. A number of them have kicked into Zone D. Some of them are contributing areas to those Zone Ds. Next slide. And then this is moving all the way down to the mouth. One of the areas that I pulled out in the table is the colored area coming in from the northeast is the Gun River. And Kalamazoo meets it there near Otsego. And so those were a couple of the numbers that were in that table. And so again, we see in the main branch of the Kalamazoo, we don't see too much going on, but we do see the Gun River has a couple water management areas are kicked into Zone D and a number of areas contributing. By the time you get to the mouth, there's nothing that's kicked into a Zone D down there. One other thing I did want to point out from the table, when you look at Kalamazoo at the mouth, the current depletion is 9 gallons per minute. 9 gallons per minute for the water management area that's at the mouth of the Kalamazoo River. Now, if you add in this this process, we take it up to almost 27,000 gallons per minute. So a huge difference. So, you know, I think you could say, boy, it seems like there'd be more of a depletion than 9 by the time you get down to the mouth. But the question is it really as much as 27,000 gallons per minute?
What's the flow of the Kalamazoo River at the mouth? Is it more than 27,000 gallons?
Oh, absolutely. But I think it's CFS, so we're going to come back to CFS and talk about river flow. But I just wanted to point that out on the table. Let's see here. Okay, next slide. So next place we go is to the St. Joseph River. And here's the same deal. I picked 4 locations. These are all on the upstream side of the first intersection with the Indiana state border. So when the water from Michigan is flowing into Indiana, that's the downstream part of where I looked at these. So Burlington is the most upstream one at about 230 square miles. Then near Colon, 700 square miles. At Three Rivers, almost 1,200 square miles. And then just upstream of the Pigeon River at 1,750. And that shows the water management areas, what the stream types are, how we allow full depletion for each of those. And as you look at them, the top one, we're at about 2,500 gallons per minute under the existing system. That would jump up to over 6,100. That would drop it from an A to a D zone. The next one down is at 683. That would jump up to almost 23,000. So I'd take it from an A to a C. And similarly, well, the next one is actually already in C. It would knock it over to a D. And then the last one down near the Indiana border, current accumulation will be with the current in that water management areas over 5,000. It would take it up over 90,000. So it would take it from an A to a D zone. So any questions on those numbers? All right, next slide. I didn't bother trying to break out sub watersheds here because the St. Joe's, I mean, just that's kind of what's happening to this whole thing. There's so much irrigation in it. There's so much, so relatively little return flow relative to the depletion. When you started counting going downstream, you're seeing the effects through a large part of the watershed. Now, the next slides. This is just going back to one that Troy showed you, but I just want to highlight a couple points on this. So this is the one with the existing system, no accumulating stream flow or depletions coming downstream. So there's 36 water management areas that are in Zone D. This is different than what Jim shows you because he'll show you a list. Hey, there's 8 that we're really concerned about. We think these are really in Zone D and the department's doing things on this. What happens is on any given day, you can query the system and it'll show different water management areas in Zone D because someone put in a proposed withdrawal, it kicks it into Zone D and it says, you need a site-specific review. The system holds on to that information. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to make depletion, wait a minute, somebody's already kicked this into a Zone D, you need to talk to the department. So that has to be resolved. Once it's resolved, it'll go back, it's not in Zone D, the department's resolved whatever has to be done to prevent it from going into Zone D. And then it clicks back off. I want to make sure you understand that so that you don't get all excited that there's 36 out there that are zone D today. And the total drainage area of those water management areas is about 730 square miles. Next slide. Then you add in the system, again, accumulating depletions and adding in return flows, it brings you up to 94 water management areas with over 1,800 square miles covered in that. And if we go to the next slide, the orange is including the water management areas that are potentially contributing to those being in zone D. Again, doesn't mean they are in zone D, it's saying this methodology shows that. And that's one of the things we need to figure out is what do we want to do with this information? So the next slide is my last one. And this is where I bring it back to stream flow and where I think we need to spend some time thinking about this. So what I did is I pulled out gauges that are in the area that I've put together these tables. And so these are also gauges that were included in the regression analysis. So that we also looked at these when I talked about potentially updating the index flow. These were part of that analysis. So I actually pulled some numbers out of that analysis to throw here for illustration purposes. So the first one I want to highlight is Battle Creek at Battle Creek. So we had looked at that water management area of Battle Creek, and just upstream of that confluence, there's a gauge, and it's 274 square miles. So if we look at what is the current depletion, it is 1.4 gallons per minute. After you go through the process, it's down to, CFS, it's down to 0.7 CFS. If you look at what the index flow is, right now it's about 77 gallons per minute. Now, if you go through the gauge analysis, it's 70. So where the 76.7 comes from is the regression analysis estimated that. In the tool itself, that number is divided by 2, and that's what's in the tool, is that number divided by 2. For this analysis, we went ahead and we doubled it back so we didn't artificially create a whole bunch of red zone areas. But it isn't corrected to what it would become if you did a site-specific review. If you did a site-specific review there, it becomes 70 CFS. Now, what I want to point out with that is that that was what the index flow was when this process went into line, which is what we're required to use in this by law. If you extended that gauge record like we did when we looked at the index flows, actually by adding in these years between 2008 and 2018, it actually increased the index flow to 73. That's looking at the entire record. If you add in an additional 20 years, it actually bumps it up by 3 CFS. If we look at the next folder one down, that's at the St. Joe at Burlington, which is close to the first line that I had there. And so here we have the current depletions are 5.6 CFS. If you do this, went through this process, it takes you up to about 13.5 CFS. Currently, the index flow is at 76 CFS. Again, at that gauge, it's 61. This, one of the things interesting is a lot of these larger drainage areas, they've never kicked in a site-specific review because there's so much water there and the way the system works. So they're still using the original half of the calculated regression number there. But here, if you look at the gauge record, again, just adding in another 20 years of flow, it jumps from 61 CFS to 65 CFS. So instead of potentially depletion of 13 CFS, we're seeing 4 more CFS there. If we go down to the last one, this is St. Joe at Montville, so this is just above the Indiana border, about almost 1,900 square miles. The current depletion is 11 CFS. This process would show over 200 CFS. That's a huge difference. That's a huge number. Relative to what the flow is in the river here, and this is the index flow, so this is your 50% of the lowest summer monthly flow, which in the regression was about 680 CFS. The gauge is 850. So if you did a site-specific review, you're going to jump it up to 850 gallons or 850 CFS. And if you add in 20 years of record on that, it jumps up to 865 CFS. So you have a jump of 15 CFS as opposed to, this would show a depletion of 200. Now, we are not seeing the magnitude of this kind of depletion in the gauge record in an obvious manner. But I do think it's important to say that if our streams were pipes, if we were delivering all this water through pipes, this process would be correct. You take some water out in an upstream location on the pipe, downstream you have less water in the pipe. But we're not dealing with pipes, we're dealing with the natural system. So in this natural system, we take water out of it. When the head goes down the stream, that tends to induce more flow from the groundwater into the stream. When you raise the head of the stream, it tends to push water back into the groundwater. So it's a very dynamic system. It's changing all the time. It changes when it's wetter, it changes when it's drier. It's a very complex system. So if we want to tease this out, it is not as simple, it is not a trivial problem to try to tease out what exactly is going on here. Now, I do think that St. Joe is worth studying, as we're trying to figure out better from a lot of points of view, including this. But I think, we're seeing that, gauges typically haven't gone way down. We're seeing in the wells, water levels are recovering in the spring. It'd be good to better understand this and get it more accurately reflected in our process, in our system, what it is now. But this is one of the things that I think we should look at. So I'm going to stop there. And one of the things I do want to do is the question I have, and I'd like input from the council, is where do we go with this information, with this study? And I really would appreciate input from the council as to what your thinking is. Do you see this as potentially a significant issue that we should pursue more? That would be one question. But then if you do, what would you like to see? What kind of information would you like to see to convince you that, hey, we are seeing an increased depletion of what's in the current system. We think it should be accounted for in some manner. And I'm not saying what that is or how it would be. That'd be part of what would have to be explored. But what kind of information would you want to see as a council member to help you deal with that kind of question? So where do we go with this study? And if you think we should continue with it, what kind of information do you want to see? What would you like to see? Or any questions on what I presented? So open to any of that.
It looks like Troy Zorn has a question.
Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So looking at your data here, the thing I'm still trying to resolve in my mind is if you go back to like one of my last slides where I was comparing the flow for those two periods, what your data here show are kind of very slight, in what I consider on a percentage basis, fairly slight increases in index flow over time.
Right. So we did.
And then when we looked at those gauges, for several of these St. Joe ones, the area around them, around the areas around these gauges are seeing, considerable increases in index flow, while these gauges are showing very slight increases, or in some instances, decreases when you compare those periods that we compared. So to me, okay, yeah, there is a little more flow there, but we've had 4 more inches of precipitation in the last decade on average. So of course there should be more flow there, or, but maybe if we weren't having some withdrawal effects, maybe we should be expecting to see, quite a bit higher increase in base flow. But that doesn't necessarily, these data don't quite touch that aspect. Or what do you think about that component of it? I don't see how this really addresses that component of it. Where would it be if we weren't having these withdrawals?
That's a good and fair point, that there has been an increase in precipitation in the area. Would we have seen more of an increase in what this showed? Now, there's a difference in how the data was analyzed between what Troy did and what I did. All I did was extend the record, which is what I did.
Right, in a wetter period.
Yes, into a wetter period, which caused it to rise marginally.
Yep.
Which Troy is, a specific 20-year period and saying, if we look at that 20 years, we'll get. Now, when we looked at the index flows, if you recall, index flow is very sensitive depending on short time periods. If you take a 5 or 10-year period, it varies tremendously as to what time period you use as to what index flow you would get. It makes a huge difference on the index flow.
And that's why we use the same period across the board, you know?
So, I mean, your point is a good one. And is it possible that it's not so much that the index flow is being depleted by these increased depletions, but it's not going as high as it would have if they weren't there?
That's what I think.
First of all, you always do a really nice job presenting stuff that I don't really know that much about. So you do a good job on that. So thanks. I guess I'm looking at it really on a technical standpoint, that I got a theoretical depletion and a result. And then I got a reality, and that's the strain gauge. If there was some type of correlation between what we're seeing on paper, which is putting things from A to D or B to D, or at least moving them down, and we didn't see a relationship like that with the gauge itself, I think it would be hard to proceed along the path that you've done. As I say, I think you laid it out really clear, and that's kind of what I was looking for, was, is the modeling at least being represented in the field? And we're not seeing any correlation really to make it go from an A to a D, or at least to a point where you wouldn't be issuing a withdrawal. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
I mean, to me, having the availability of this model that suggests that, hey, we could be undercounting the influence of withdrawals further upstream that the system's not taking into account. I think that's worth looking into further. And I think the logical next step, once you've said, hey, we've got a potential problem here that we've modeled out, and we've used data sets that themselves are kind of based on a lot of assumptions and a lot of incomplete data, because we just didn't have a lot at the time that this system was built. The next logical step would be, how do we then go and design some kind of field experiment to capture actual measurement, take into account this dynamic system? Because like I said, it's, if it was a pipe, it'd be easy, but it's not. It's got groundwater influence, it's got precipitation influence, it's got changing conditions, drought conditions, flood conditions, all of those other things. That would be the next logical step to me, is how do you design a field experiment so that you're actually measuring potential impacts, so that you have some of this field data to say, now we know what potential, what our actual downstream impact is. And therefore, once we have that in representative locations and different conditions around the state, that's how we can then build that into a system where we say, now it potentially can be, validated through the model and become part of this program, to start accounting for these downstream depletions. So I guess that's where I would go next, is I would say, what's the field experiment that gets us to figure out what this actual impact is?
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Looks like Brian's got his hand up. Brian, you're the host for right now. You don't have to put your hand up. You can just talk.
Trying to follow good order. I appreciate it too. I represent one of those stakeholder groups who, really been fearful and have not liked this component of our system since just before it went into law. And I really appreciated the work that's gone into this. I agree. I think the models committee has kind of honed in a little bit here, at least on the technical nature. As Dave described, if this was a pipe, we would add it up 1 for 1. 1 gallon depleted upstream is, 1 gallon less downstream. On the other end of the spectrum is where we're at right now, which is 1 gallon depleted upstream equals 0 downstream. And I think from a common sense perspective, we know that we know that water flows downstream, and we know that our river segments are not, independent pools of water or lakes. The question is, where in between those two spectrums is nature really sorting this out? 1 gallon upstream, there can be compensatory effects from that, and it's somewhere in between 0 and 1 in all likelihood. I think that it does. I go back, for me, to the statute, which was set up to prevent ARIs from happening, and had to follow kind of a pretty prescriptive prediction process of that. But we're supposed to try to prevent ARIs, and we gotta. I think we do need to invest into trying to figure out what is the nature of that compensatory effect. I actually wince a little bit to think that to really refine that, there's going to be a lot of factors and a lot of data collection involved in that. I think it matters, how many miles of a watershed it flows past, where the aquifers compared to the streams, head pressures at different times of the year, all that. So my worry is, yes, I think eventually we need to really refine that understanding. But then I flip over and go back to, if that's going to be another decade, we're not also preventing that cumulative impact from occurring. And so I would just say at this point, for me, I'm sort of wanting to separate the implementation of this into sort of two buckets artificially. One is, if we did this, I don't know right now how we would handle the existing withdrawals that seem to be now, because of different accounting, triggering zone Ds. I think that's a more complex, takes a lot more reason and equitability to work through those issues. But I am pretty convinced for myself that we should not be adding to that list. So for new registrations that are going in, I don't want to see, I don't really want to wait another decade and have, a 300 or a 400 registrant list that then becomes a zone D. So I think we definitely need to keep pursuing this, in my opinion. Both some of the technical refinement, see what we can find in data. But I think we also, as a council, really need to think about how we may be able to implement something sooner, just to, again, maybe not deal with the existing registrants that it puts in a weird position, but to deal with not making that list longer and not missing ARIs, which at the end of the day is the goal of the statute. So thanks for all the work. It's been awesome. I've been awed, and progress happens, right? This wasn't really feasible back in 2008 or 2007, and it's feasible and readily available now, and that's not to be missed and not recognized. So thank you all for your work.
All right, thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments?
Looks like Jim Nicholas has got his hand up.
All right, Jim.
I'm going to venture outside the realm of science, which is dangerous for me to do, but my immediate thought on seeing this was, we have water management areas with the concept that that area can be managed. And if you approach a zone D, or a registrant wants to do a withdrawal that would go to zone D, that a group of people would get together somehow and agree on how to manage the water in that area so that everyone can have it, not just first come, first serve. If that water management area then includes 100 water management areas upstream of it, I don't see how such a set of discussions could take place. So your water management area is actually not a water management area anymore. It's that sub-watershed with all of the sub-watersheds above it that contribute water to that. And so I'm just thinking, like, logistically, how do you handle something like that?
Well,
I
since
don't
we
mean
haven't
comment, but
I'm not sure how big. You're right. Scale change is phenomenal. Anything else? Okay. Well, I want to thank Troy and Dana for their work. I think it is good work. I think it has moved us forward. This is information we did not have before, and we do now. So The models committee will noodle on this some more, try to figure out some possible ways to go. I'm sure we'll be back with some recommendations of further studies or whatever.
Okay.
The models,
Sorry, Dave, before you continue, looks like James Clift has his hand up too.
okay, sorry, James.
No, it's
Go ahead.
good. I think you just hit it there. I was wondering what would be next. So getting kind of a list of the next studies or projects that you would undertake to kind of better understand this issue, I think that would be helpful.
That's what we plan to do. So
Perfect.
we'll be back. We'll be back. The last thing on the models committee is that I periodically give you topics of our committee, what we're working on. I will be updating this soon. Our committee, we're going to meet again in the near future and talk about our priorities with the idea of how do we get in sync any proposals that we want to put forward to when the council is going to be having its next report to the legislature and governor. So I will send that out in the next few weeks, updated after the committee figures out what our priorities are for the rest of the year. That's it, Brian.
Thank you very much, Dave. Great, very informative, meaty, and the data committee is jealous and envious. Nice work. Pat, are you ready with the new topics committee update?
Sure, thank you. New topics committee met last month. We had 2 topics we reviewed. One, Emily Finnell will talk about. So I'll leave that to her, but the other one is a presentation by Jeremy Asher, Assistant Director for MSU Institute of Water Research. This proposal is a concept using change in land management practices to increase the infiltration rate, which is a pretty straightforward concept, but what to do with that extra water gained is what MSU and Jeremy has been looking at. And so he's got this concept that envisioned originally a market-based approach, although there was a lot of pushback on that. So some of that is still being kind of reviewed by Jeremiah and the team. But the whole idea is to try to come up with ways to change the land use to as a way of preventative measure, I guess, within Part 327. To provide a solution to somebody who is really stuck with no other options. So there are some that wanted to give Jeremiah an opportunity to present this to the council. Others didn't think it was quite ready for prime time. So I did provide a quick summary with some links to that, but since that was literally just updated yesterday, I want to give the committee a little bit more time to provide input. And then when that's done, I can give it to Christine and get that on the website. So if anybody is interested in seeing the YouTube presentation, it's about an hour, you could take a look at that. But in the meantime, we're going to recommend that Jeremiah and his team work with the models committee, because there's two topics that are 2 main issues. One had to do with the model that was used. Is that appropriate for what they're trying to do? So the models committee is the place to kind of parse that out. And then the other thing would be to do really more with the legality of this trading concept. And so I think Jeremiah is going to need to get a little bit of input from maybe some outside sources on that. New topics would be happy to provide him feedback on that when he's ready to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But that's the one that's kind of causing a little bit more concern, and it's got to be, I guess we need to have a little bit more detail on what the implications of that would be. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll
On that note.
Yep, go ahead.
So I think that one of the things the law provides for somebody to come up with an alternative, something, I forget what it's called.
Preventative measures.
Preventive measures. And we had a really, really short list of what somebody could do with that, but it wasn't provided in the law. So I think what Jeremiah is proposing is an innovative approach.
Right.
It may not be ready for prime time yet, but it is an innovative approach. And frankly, I think it'd be worth the council talking about it conceptually before we spend more time digging into the technical stuff, because I think the council ought to wrestle with, do we even think this is something that we want to potentially propose as an alternative or not? I mean, if we think it's not a good idea, then why spend more time on it? But if we say, hey, we think there's merit to it, let's do some more specific things, whatever those specific things are. But I do think it's something that I think the council would be interested in hearing and talking about it. And I think that feedback from the council would be very helpful to figure out where to go.
Well, that was the original recommendation, and then we got some pushback that some members didn't feel like it should be discussed at the council. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. Do the committees deal with it first?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, I agree. So I guess it's really up to the council if you want to hear it. I'm sure Jeremiah would be interested, and I think we could do it in a timely manner. Allow the video to be viewed by members beforehand, and then spend 20 minutes to half an hour just kind of talking about the concept and whether it's worth pursuing, like you said. So I'm just trying to herd the cats.
So if it's okay for me to share, I did chat briefly with Jeremiah about this morning, and Jeremiah, I think you're on, so please chime in with any thoughts that you have as well. But one of the things that I had recommended to him was, hey, of these conceptual, potential roadblocks we've got, is there anything that you can do to sort of look at your approach and, and what can be designed as next steps, and how do we deal with some of the legal questions and some of the, some of the questions about applicability in the statute and whatnot. And so I do think what we came to was pretty good agreement that, he could kind of tweak those pieces of it and, and take a look at some of the concerns that have been raised so far before bringing that back to the council. And Jeremiah, I don't want to put you under a time crunch, but if you think that that's ready or will be ready in time to, to provide that to the council, and maybe that goes through one of your two committees first, however you guys want to deal with that, then I think we can, we can have a better discussion about it.
Yeah, there's no problem on my end from getting some modifications to that presentation and changing some of the things that I think might be some sticking points for a few people. So I can definitely get that modified and happy to share that and then, move it forward from there. If that works for others.
That sounds great, Jeremiah. And also the other thing that has come up in this discussion is this issue of preventative measures. And it's my understanding that there had been some work on that, a list or some guidance a while ago. And I think that'd be great for new topics to kind of resurrect and see if it makes sense to look and see if that list is still available, or does that ring a bell? Brian Burrows had mentioned that.
This is that's why I had my hand up. Thanks for bringing that up. I have not tried to dig that up yet lately, although I'm very close to. If my memory serves me, it would have been the guidance that was assembled by the first Water Use Advisory Committee after the implementation of the statute. We put together guidance, kind of expanded guidance on preventative measures that was in line with the statutory language. And that would have been embedded in that first report. I can't remember if that would have been a 2010 or a 2011 report, but if we can dig that up and try to send it out, or if anybody wants to jump on it, that's where you should find it. And we had a whole subcommittee on preventative measures at that time, spent quite a bit of time, and we did produce some guidance. And that is one of the right frameworks for this, because that is a legal avenue for an applicant to use and work through with Eagle. So I think it'd be good for everybody to review that, including me.
And are you talking about the previous iteration of the council that I think their report came out in what, 2009?
It was whenever the very first report after the statute. It was, the statute actually called for a report with very specific items that must be addressed within that very first short time period. So I can't remember if it would have been 09 or if it would have been right after that.
Final report was 09, but
Yeah, that's what's sticking in my mind was that it was 2009.
I'll look at it.
Anyway, I think it's worth dusting that off and seeing if that could be useful. So that's what we'll be working on. That's all I have.
Any other questions for Pat? I can't quite see in the room, but I'm not seeing any hands raised electronically. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Next update would either be Emily and or Kelly with the Conservation and Efficiency Committee.
I'm going to go ahead and do the report out, Brian.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to give updates on our progress as a Water Conservation Efficiency Committee. As we were doing last year, we've been meeting the first Thursday of each month. So if you're interested in joining our committee meetings, they're a standing meeting at 9 o'clock, so we can forward you those Zoom or team meeting notices. We've had 2 meetings already this year, focusing initially on the report that was shared with the council this morning with a slideshow, which is the Dow Fellows report that was addressing the WUAC 2020 recommendation, which was calling for doing an assessment of our climate, energy, water infrastructure, and sustainability programs and how those programs and policies may be contributing towards water conservation goals and objectives. And then also taking a look at some of the other programs across the Great Lakes region for some exemplar programs or practices that we could incorporate. And then the U of M team also looked at some other programs across the country with similar water contexts to identify some programs that we might want to take a closer look at. So in that report that I shared, or that Christine shared this morning, there are a couple of findings that the Dow Fellows team actually identified that we're going to be focusing on as a committee, and we incorporated in our what's currently a working 2020 work plan for this year for the committee. A couple of those include looking at developing a water stewardship statewide outreach program. And we've got some internal discussions going on already right now to start to bring together an internal group to talk about what that concept could look like. There's been some past work that the Office of the Great Lakes has been involved in and some social science that we're hoping to be able to build on, and then also connect with some larger Great Lakes regional organizations like the IJC's public perception study, and a number of other efforts. So I'm excited that we're going to start taking some next steps towards advancing that idea that was also in some of the previous Water Use Advisory Council reports. Another one is strengthening our public-private partnerships between state agencies and utilities to help promote some water energy savings programs that are available. And we heard from some speakers last year, Consumers Energy did some of our presentations at our committee meetings talking about some of their programs. So we think there's some good opportunity to move the needle on that, that area. Strengthening partnerships with research institutions, developing metrics for water energy savings resulting from water infrastructure improvements. And there was some work supported through the Materials Management Division in Eagle that was looking at lead service line replacements and some of the water energy savings that were resulting from that. So we're going to be looking at some opportunities to advance that work. And then using community-based participatory processes with scenario planning, which I think ties in really well with some of the work that we're going to start undertaking this year to look at water user committees and developing tools and strategies for those groups. So we're going to continue to take some next steps to finalize our work plan. A lot of the items on our work plan for this year are also carry forward from last year. They're kind of ongoing things that the committee will continue to work on, and then figuring out what our process will be to prioritize potential recommendations that we may want to bring forward to the WUAC. And then we're also thinking about a couple of topics to continue our speaker series to increase committee knowledge and address some of the gaps. So a few ideas that we're thinking about now include adding some speakers to help us better understand Michigan's water conservation programs tied to agricultural practices and irrigation, and looking at opportunities to bring in some water educators and teachers, and maybe even a student who's been through a water education program. I also wanted to update the council on an item that I talked about at one of the previous council meetings that will be coming up later this spring, which is the Joint Aquatic Science Meeting. The Great Lakes Compact Council and the regional body are going to be co-hosting a session focused on water conservation. So I'll be co-chairing that with Pete Johnson. I just want to thank some of the council members for submitting abstracts. We did get 6 abstracts. 5 of them will be included in our session, and we had 3 abstracts from some Michigan partners. So that'll be great to showcase some of our work. Next slide, please. The next thing I wanted to update the council on is actually some work from the subcommittee that came from the New Topics Committee about 1.5 years ago. Tied to water user committees. So the first item Pat already mentioned is the draft overview of the water use program and FAQs about water withdrawals and water user committee document. And that was sent out this morning, so I'm sure many of you have not had a chance to review it. But just as background, this is a draft frequently asked questions document that Jim Milne and Andy LeBaron, James Clifton, and I have been working on with some review from Margaret Bettenhausen that basically helps to provide some clear and concise information about frequently asked questions on the water use program, the water withdrawals, and how the water use program would interact with water user committees. And this was something that came out of that subcommittee and our discussions about 1.5 years ago as an important education and outreach tool. So we wanted to share this with the council. I've already had some discussions with the New Topics Committee, and we didn't receive any comments that really resulted in any substantive changes. So we wanted to bring this now to the full council and give you the opportunity to review the draft document and then submit any comments to me by March 1st. I'm happy to take any questions on that after the committee report out, if there are any. And I guess before I move to the next item, maybe now, Brian, would be a good time if anybody has looked at that FAQ document. And I can answer any questions on that or the committee report out for the Conservation Efficiency Committee.
Well, I guess I would just mention, because I've had a chance to take a look at the draft, and thank you for sharing, that I think it's really good. And I also think that it's a good opportunity to kind of cross-reference and make use of a lot of the other documents that have been getting developed kind of through separate efforts, either by Eagle or by some partnerships, everything from what does a landowner need to know about registration and site-specific review to, to some of these other sort of more user-friendly than reading the statute documents that help to explain these things, because the more those can be integrated with each other and, and say, hey, well, if you have a question about this that's not in this document, take a look at this other one over here, without making any one document too long and too unwieldy for somebody to just pick up and get a basic idea of what their question was. So that was the main suggestion I had, was let's do what we can to pull those pieces in together and link them to each other, hyperlinks, or say, hey, go here to find out more, as that kind of opportunity.
Thanks, Laura. All right, well, I'm happy to. Oh.
I was just gonna say, I thought it was great. I think you hit the mark, Emily, and I appreciate you taking the lead on that. I know it took a little time to get the language right, but I think it shows in the final product, so thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And I think our next step is, once we've gotten full council review and any comments incorporated, if there's things that we need to discuss, we'll reconvene our group. Otherwise, we'd like to get it through our comms folks and have them, look through it for readability and then post it to the website. So feel free, you've got my email. I didn't include it on the slide, but you can send me any edits or comments on the document to my email. All right. The next item I'm really excited to update the council on. As you know, we have, through the Office of Great Lakes, been partnering with Michigan Sea Grant to co-fund the development of the Water User Committee Users Manual and Case Study Integrated Assessment Project. And the competitive process for this grant opportunity was actually issued in February of 2021. But it's a pretty lengthy process that Michigan Sea Grant administers that involves a lot of review by not only the project sponsors, but external peer reviews outside of the state, as well as the leadership team. And then the project proposals have to go through approval by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. We did just hear in January of this year that NOAA has approved this grant award. And this is actually not publicly announced yet, but we had to wait till at least February 1st so we could talk about the project, which is why it's sort of embedded here in our committee update. But we are going to be officially announcing the grant award. Sea Grant will be issuing that on February 15th, which will be awarding $225,000 from the Michigan Great Lakes Protection Fund through Eagle's Office of the Great Lakes, and then $125,000 through Michigan Sea Grant for a 2-year project that's going to be awarded to Michigan State University. And the lead PI for this project is Dr. Adam Zwickel. Adam and I have actually worked on some other social science projects in the past. Just to refresh all of your memory, though, this was one of the WUAC recommendations, which was developed by that subcommittee that Pat and I and several others participated in about 1.5 years ago. And the idea is to develop a user's manual, which was really a previously 2014 WUAC recommendation, and then convene some initial Water User Committee case studies to help refine that user's manual and get some feedback, and then improve that document so that it can be finalized and made available for the department and for water user committees to use. So I'm pleased to introduce and turn the slideshow over to Adam, who will be giving a brief overview today for the project that he'll be leading that just started February 1st, and introduce the project team members so you're all aware of kind of who the multidisciplinary team will be that'll be working on this project, and talk a little bit about the timeline and our expectations and hopes to continue to engage and collaborate with the WUAC as part of this project. I also put together a state agency project leadership team that'll be working with Adam and his team to help give them programmatic and policy and technical advice throughout the project, and just be a resource to help them be successful and ensure we have some great outcomes from this project. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce Adam. I think I saw him. Oh, there, your screen is on now. Yeah. And his slides are just after mine, and then we can take any questions. We will also, if there's interest from the council, be happy to host, a longer webinar or meeting to go into greater detail on the project. But just out of respect of other agenda items today, we've got just kind of a brief overview for today's meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Adam.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that nice introduction there, Emily, and thanks for taking the time to listen to me today, everyone. Yeah, our project team is real excited to do this work. It's important work not only for Michigan and for this committee and for water use, but also we think there's a real opportunity here to make some contributions to the science of natural resource governance. And I think this context here in Michigan is really unique, and we're real excited to do this work. So the title for the proposal that we submitted and was awarded was Building Capacity for Collaborative Governance Through a Participatory Modeling Approach. And that really kind of lays out our approach to it. So I'll go over it real quick. Next slide, please. Our project was, we had these, it's led by these basic goals, the first 3 of which are fundamental research questions that we'll start by answering, which is, 1, what are the current barriers associated with the convening of a water use committee? There's a lot of expertise on our team, and talking with Emily and the leadership team that she described, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and experience that says, well, it's mainly going to be lack of familiarity and awareness, among other things. But it's very important to us that we don't just operate on those assumptions, and we're going to be making sure to collect data to lead us through the way. So our strategy for this project is really a listen first approach. And so where we'll definitely accept guidance for what data to collect, we'll always be operating off of recorded recorded data and collected data. So, the next logical step is, after identifying barriers, is what's needed to overcome those barriers. And then 3, once a WOOC is convened, what information, tools, and strategies do they need to reach an agreement for sustainable collective water use? And what is the best process for these groups to work towards that end? And then, our major goal is obviously the deliverable that's requested for this is to communicate that information in a user's manual or a WOOC guide in such a way that is broadly accessible to the public. And then finally, we'll pilot the effectiveness of that guide by convening 2 to 3 case studies using a participatory modeling format. Next slide, please. So the basic overview and the milestones, the timeline that we expect to hit is, we're going to begin with a water user survey of major water users in Michigan. And so this will be a broad survey that's focused more on sort of the nuts and bolts and the quantifiable data. And so we'll be looking at gauging people's level of awareness and familiarity with not only water use committees, but water policy in general, and also collecting data, looking at where do people turn to for water-related information, who do they trust, who would they like to be communicating that information, which sometimes isn't always the same agency that's tasked with communicating that information. And then we'll use that data from the survey to really fuel our focus groups. And so I'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, but we'll be putting together an advisory board, and we'll be drawing heavily from our advisory board for participants in a participatory modeling focus group. And this focus group is going to have two goals. One, it's going to serve as a dry run for our later case studies, but 2, it'll also be an important time for us to collect data regarding what information is needed in the water use committee format, what resources are needed, and what sort of group processes work best in getting people to reach a collective agreement. So following the focus groups, then we'll spend a good portion of time really developing that WOOC guide. And in our proposal, we budgeted a professional science writer who has expertise in translating technical and scientific data into a broadly accessible format. So that's our main goal, is as was previously mentioned, not just taking water policy and then creating another unwieldy document to describe water policy. And then finally, we'll take that guide, and then we'll use it as a guiding document and test it in some participatory case studies. Now, these are going to be actual case studies, but we will be working very closely with them. And as in the focus groups, I failed to mention this, we'll be utilizing decision support tools such as the Great Lakes Watershed management system, and working with people as they use the tool where it's available, locations where it's available, and then locations where those sort of decision support tools are not available, we'll work in a more moderated format. Next slide, please. So the structure of our overall project is this leadership team that Emily just mentioned, that made up of state agency folks that really are extremely helpful explaining all of the technical aspects of this and making sure that we're operating under the confines that would make our work useful and keep us applicable. And then we have the project team, which is all from MSU, which I'll introduce our team here in a second. And then the greater advisory board, which will be asking for recruits from you all, from WUAC as a whole, or suggestions for people to include. The strength or the success of this project, I think, is really going to draw on this advisory board, which we hope to be as diverse as possible. We need to receive the input of as many stakeholder groups as possible to make sure that what we create is applicable to everyone. So next slide, please. So I am the principal investigator for this. The overall project lead. I'm associate professor at the Department of Community Sustainability and Environmental Science and Policy program at MSU. And I'm a social scientist, a decision scientist, and my work looks at climate resilience at community, state, and federal levels. And so I'll also be primarily working with the advisory board as a liaison. But the rest of our team, next slide, is a really great interdisciplinary team that I'm really excited to be working with for this project. I think it's great. Dr. Maria Claudia Lopez, also at the Department of Community Sustainability. She's an environmental resource economist. And her work specializes in rural communities to identify institutional arrangements that help them manage natural resources sustainably, which is perfect for this project. And she'll be the lead for the water user survey portion. Next slide. Dr. Laura Schmidt-Olabisi, also in community sustainability, also environmental science and policy program. She is an ecologist by training and a participatory modeler. So she works directly with communities on the ground to create change in complex systems. She's a specialist at working with people through these multi-stage decision processes. And she'll be the co-lead for the focus groups and case studies, which will use that participatory modeling format. Next slide. Dr. Glenn O'Neill is with the Institute of Water Research. So he's their modeling guru and web developer. So he develops and maintains the Great Lakes Watershed Management System and works with a website interface with that. And so he'll be assisting us in utilizing that in the focus group and case study activities. Next slide. Dr. Jeremiah Asher, we just talked about. Everyone's well familiar with Jeremiah. Assistant Director of Institute of Water Research, a wealth of expertise and background in this area, and is overall very, very valued. Recently, he's been working on developing sensors for managing water, floating vegetated wetlands, and groundwater recharge. And he'll be working with Laura Schmidt-Olabisi to co-lead the focus groups and case studies. And finally, we have Brockton Feltman, who's a fourth-year doctoral candidate in Department of Community Sustainability and Environmental Science and Policy program. His research focuses on local and collaborative governance of common pool resources, mainly water. And Brock and I have worked in a really similar scenario in Kansas, where they have different formats for local governance of water. And so he'll be helping out throughout the project. So finally, the one thing I want to just plug again is we really would love to hear from the expertise of the WUAC, and we're looking for some meaningful engagement here. So whether you're critical of this process or you're a big proponent of this process, we really think that the success of our project and really the output that we'll have is going to be dependent on your voice being heard. And so, you know, it wouldn't be an enormous ask. We expect to draw from you maybe 4 times a year. And so what we would do is primarily ask for your feedback before and after we collect data. So prior to our sending out the survey, we would send around our final draft of the survey to make sure we're asking all the right questions, we're not leaving anything out. Afterwards, we would submit a technical report showing you, sharing our results with you. For the participatory modeling focus groups, we would love our advisory boards to be members. So this will serve, like I said, as a dry run for the case studies. And, we would love for all of you who represent various stakeholders to play this role in this, so we can make sure that we're incorporating different viewpoints and perspectives throughout the process. We would come to you with the WUC guide on a few different occasions. We wouldn't send you draft 17 for fine-tuned comments throughout, but we would make sure we would be coming to the advisory board to make sure that we're on the right path throughout. And then finally, the case studies are going to be very important at the end of this project. And so we'd be coming to the advisory board for input on the best way to select those case studies. So identifying the criteria, and then if you have contacts in those areas to help recruit those members. So next slide, please. So if you're interested in serving on that project advisory board yourself, or you have someone that you'd like to recommend that you think would be really important to be involved, please email me. I would love to get in touch with you, and I'd love to talk more with you about the project. So that's all I have. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Looks like Dave Hamilton's got a question.
Yeah, so Adam, the participatory case study, could you explain a little bit or maybe explain what that looks like? I'm not exactly sure what that would be.
Yeah, so we would be convening sort of our first actual water user committees, and then we working closely with them to reach an agreement as the water user committee is envisioned. And so in areas where something like the Great Lakes Watershed Management System is available, we'd be working with this. We envision working with them using that tool to sort of model different outcomes to arrive at a collective decision. And in areas where it's not available, we would pursue alternative routes.
Okay, so that you will actually try to find people that are water users in particular water management area and try to create one of these work groups or committees. That's the idea?
Correct, yeah.
Just have a comment. I'm really excited about this. And I think it's great to have a team like this assembled to be able to do it, because when we were talking about it as a committee level, it was like boiling the ocean. So this is great. So I'm looking forward.
I share your feelings. It is. I feel like we assembled like the perfect combination of expertise for different, for the different facets. So I'm really excited about it as well.
Great. Any other questions for Adam or Emily? Not seeing any. Thank you both very, very much. Adam, welcome. And thank you for a great update. We look forward to hearing more.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. All right, shifting gears. Doug and/or Laura for the implementation committee.
Well, I think what Adam just pointed out is exactly what we've been talking about in the implementation committee. It's what has been requested and what has been suggested in the past and what is actually being done and moving forward. So we did meet January 18th. And we talked about what steps and what paths do we need to move forward. We know there has to be a report done in 2022. Here we sit in February. And so at some point, there's going to have to be a semblance of information that would go into that report. But we also said, well, we want to look backwards on what was in the 2014 report recommendations that didn't make it into the 2020 report. There really should be. And so we talked about this last time, is if all of the subcommittees could relook at some of those. We've sent out kind of a summary. I think we provided at last meeting as far as where are some of those or what were some of those recommendations and where were they at? And we could certainly send that spreadsheet out again. So that is one of our requests to the full council and to the committee members, is to go back and relook at that 2014 just to see what items are not in the 2020 report that you do believe that should move forward. The other things that we talked about was what are being worked on in the 2020 report. Some of those items didn't require funding. I believe this one was a grant that was identified in that report. So we're going to be able to say, hey, our hope is when we do go, again, this is just thoughts in the final report. What was recommended in the past? What is the status of that? What is the estimated completion? Where does that stand? Maybe some of those recommendations get removed like we have on a couple in the past, but then also what are we projecting? What are some of the new items moving forward? So all of these, we are keeping different spreadsheets and different status in the implementation committee just to help showcase that we're actually doing something. There is going to be a deliverable, so hopefully when they read the report in 2022, they're going to see a bang for their buck, because there is tax dollars being spent on these. So we hope to put in projected timeline, responsibilities, actions to be taken with the funding that was appropriated on those items that were recommended from 2020. The final one, it was suggested maybe we do a performance metrics and actions taken by Eagle water use staff. There's been a lot of tasks that have been put upon them, such as timelines and turnarounds, that it would be nice to just show that there were some improvements made to the overall system. And this is the metrics that it would be. So that's kind of the report that we talked about. Our subcommittee meets kind of on an intermittent basis. We're hoping that there's going to be an announcement on funding releasing anytime soon, so that then we can say, hey, here's the dollars that's available. How is it going to be pushed out to the various tasks, and we can get that going. Laura, what did I miss?
That was great. And actually kind of part of the reason why we had constructed the agenda the way that we did was because a lot of what the implementation committee does is sort of think about, what does our report look like? And how do we put that together? And so we talked a lot about kind of how do we, almost create a report in two parts where, we not only have our new recommendations for here, here's new stuff that we've looked at, but then also have a section that sort of keeps track of what have we recommended in the past and where are we on the status on that.
I think that sounds great. I appreciate that work. Does anybody else have any questions or feedback for them at this point?
And I guess, does anybody need a new copy of the spreadsheet of past recommendations from 2014 to take a look at again? That's, I don't know if you're
Probably a good
gonna give me
idea. I'm guessing that that's almost always helpful in getting better participation. Yeah.
I'll send that out to you. Thanks.
So,
Sorry, no.
so I have a question on that. So, we don't have some of those members here anymore. A lot of those recommendations came up and, we were asked to put forward our top recommendations, where a lot of committee members were passionate about some of those recommendations that were left off, but they might not still be here to put those forward. And I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, I guess, when we review those.
So when we came up with the 2020 report, we kind of looked back at the 14 and said, okay, if we only have limited amount of funds,
right?
That was the idea back then. What is the sweet stuff? What is truly what we feel each subcommittee should be working on? And that's where those recommendations came from. We recognize there was 70, 80 different ones. Let's make it more of a manageable bite. But we also know times change. So as we continue to work on these new lists, what should we have left behind, or what did we leave behind, knowing that we could bring that forward maybe in the future, but it wasn't quite as high priority as these items.
So essentially, if you have information that we don't about progress that's been made on an item that's on the list, please give us that. And then also give us your thoughts on, where should these be on the priority list?
There might also be different funding opportunities.
And right, exactly. So, that's kind of what we want to be building is we want this to be a living document, essentially, that, as things happen, things move up and down on the priority list, whether it's because of funding or because of, hey, we solved one problem and now we've got an opportunity to move on to this one. So what needs to be at the top of that list on sort of an ongoing basis?
Other questions? Okay. I appreciate it. And I think it is also a great idea to well, to one, obviously not lose track of any of those past recommendations to keep driving for implementation. But I heard the recommendation that maybe in this report, we spend a little bit of time in it to give an overview or I guess a program-wide update. Where are we at with size of it, conditions of it, the report times? I think that's really a good idea to add to this report as well. So thank you. And you know, and I'm sure as you guys continue to keep your eyes and your brains on what the report should look like, you know, if we do hear about funding, I'm sure that will thrust some new considerations for the report as well. So, thank you. I'll shift to the next agenda item, but sort of stay on the report theme. And I'm just going to provide at least a high level for right now timeline heads up for that report. And Brian will follow in later with some discussion about future meetings. But for the report that we have coming up back on agenda item number 7, that report is going to be due by the end of the year. There you go. So by past experience, it would be great for our early December meeting to basically have not that heavy of a meeting at all, right? To do some final edits, to have everybody do final reviews of a good draft and have worked through a lot of this stuff. We know from having submitted it, you know, pretty late in December, led us to submit it to the legislature at least three times. It's a funny time of the year. The earlier, the better, but you can generally plan that by December. It's our goal to have us do very sort of final and small scale wrap up of that final report, which means that in November, that's sort of the last month to really be working through heavy edits and reporting, report elements, and perhaps if necessary to still be working through some final consensus, reaching on some recommendations. Taking another step back from that, that leaves September and October, possibly if you're ambitious, August, to be those primary months where we're presenting things that we want in the report or recommendations coming out of committees. So on the proactive side, it would be great to give informational stuff and start it early in August. We probably need to be making sure that ideally that we're doing those informational first presentations at least by September. So we can have time, depending on the nature of a recommendation, to really have time in September and October to work through them. Again, you know, that can spill into November if necessary. But that's the general sense for timeline that we wanted to make sure that everybody had in focus. So we really have, you know, now is early February, and we probably in all reality have work up through August before we really need to kick that into, you know, council-wide presentations and really working through reaching consensus and leaving enough time for the report. Any questions on that? I know that's general, and again, Brian will probably be talking about future meetings and timing for that later, but any questions on that general timeline? And I can't see if there's people in person that might be asking a question.
I'm looking around the room for you there, Brian. I don't see any questions, but I'll add additionally, one of the things that we've talked about in terms of timeline for the report, and I think Brian Eggers will cover this a little bit too, meeting dates, is that we are getting a backlog of meetings in which we have not been able to do any approvals, even of minutes, let alone approvals of recommendations. What are we at? This is the 4th meeting that, yeah. And understandable that, you know, that we've had a lot of restrictions, pandemic problems, you know, it has been logistically very difficult. I am hoping very much that things are going to start to kind of clear up a little bit, and you know, there's going to be more availability and more ability for us to get back together in person. But we need to be thinking about, particularly as we move in through the spring and then get into summer and start moving to monthly meetings, is the Open Meetings Act, unless the legislature decides to revisit it, is now requiring in-person quorum for those decisions. So there's going to have to be kind of a decision point at some point this spring or this summer that we've got to get really, really on top of having quorum in person for these meetings. Because otherwise we can't move forward with any of our, we have a statutory obligation to produce these reports by the end of the year, every 2 years. So I guess, you know, this is not the point at which I get mean yet, but I definitely want to put it out there and give people the food for thought, that as we move through this process, again, unless things turn around, and we never know what's coming up now with COVID, unless things turn around and the legislature says once again, hey, Open Meetings Act, you guys can go back to remote, that we need to think about, at some point, we're going to really need to have to emphasize, we've got to show up here in person, and we may need to do it even to just spend a good chunk of the meeting approving stuff that we've taken a look at in the past and haven't been able to officially approve because we didn't have quorum. I appreciate your comments for that.
Perfect. If I don't see any other questions, I think this is, I'll pass the chair role over to Brian Eggers to pick up on agenda item number 8.
This is Frank. I just wanted to comment on Laura's very tactful and delicate way of saying that we have to get ourselves to the meetings.
We will, and we won't leave it very
in the building.
we will help everybody with that. We're trying to figure out, and reading case rates and stuff, but it will be either this early summer or maybe our spring meeting, but we will tell everybody, hey, this is the meeting that we're really going to push for in-person quorum so we can get caught up on our governance. We're not sort of making a general one, kind of guilting people to come at each and every. We'll let everybody know when we really want to make sure, and we ask people to, absorb some risk health-wise to get in to help do that.
And Brian, this is Frank Edowagishik again, and that it'll be helpful to know fairly well in advance what meeting that's going to be where you make that push, because of the pandemic and a variety of different meetings. For me, I have a 4-hour drive on either end of the meeting. And so that means I can only do one thing that day. Whereas today I've got 4 meetings and, they're all online, but it's just, if I'm going to be there in person, I'm going to need to schedule around that. Okay. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a good point, Frank. Thank you.
Scheduling coming right up. Thank you, Brian and Laura. Moving along here, folks. Jim Milne, you want to walk us through the Eagle update, please?
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the program update for Eagle's water use program. I'm going to start by giving you a personnel update for my unit. Then I'm going to describe how the unit staff are providing technical support for resource permit application. I'm going to share updated program metrics. I'll give you an update on the status of depleted water management areas. Then I'll finally, time permitting, I'll answer questions. Next slide. All right, sitting to my left is our newest staff person, Austin York, who started on January 10th as our 4th SSR geologist. Austin got his MS from Western Michigan. You're welcome.
So Austin, you gotta say something so that the camera will focus on you. So that everybody can see you online.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Well,
Because this owl, it moves around the room depending on who's talking.
yeah. Hello, it's nice to be here. I wasn't actually sure if I was going to be coming into this in person today or not, but I decided to. I'm glad I did. It's nice to be here and meet all of you today.
So that's the good news. Unfortunately, Jill Van Dyke is on medical leave indefinitely. Lena Pappas will be doing all of our groundwater model reviews in the interim. The people have on projects that Jill is working on should be directed to me for the time being. Next slide. The Water Use Assessment Unit is taking over technical reviews in support of resource permit applications that were formerly done by WRD's Hydrologic Studies Unit. Our SSR staff will be reviewing hydrogeological studies, and Lena's going to be doing our groundwater model reviews. The primary point of contact for resource permit applications will still be the division permitting staff. Next slide. Okay, those are the compliance numbers for July 9th through the end of calendar year 2021. Compliance communications include after the fact registrations, missing pump information requests, revised registrations, and installation verification requests. So installation verification, that's a newer category. That's where we contact the property owner if it's not obvious that a registered withdrawal has been installed and operating. We'll contact the property owner to verify that they did in fact install the withdrawal. Violation notices include violations for unregistered wells, wells installed and or operated differently than authorized. And this number includes second violation notices as well as first violations. Complaints include water level drops in new irrigation systems, which may or may not be authorized. And if we get multiple complaints for the same operation, it's only counted once.
Question, Jim. The installation verifications, do you send out any letters outside of, to the well owner? Could I get copies of those when you get the verification?
Sure. Yes. To the property owner's legal liable party, but we typically, if we know the well driller, we'll copy the well driller. We can copy you. Okay, the next slide is annual metrics for the same time period. So pre-screening reviews, those are equivalent for a site-specific review that we do for drinking water division for newer increased public water supply withdrawals. We provide suggestions back to drinking water for additional information or proposed modifications to withdrawals if we can't authorize them as proposed. So those 19 were zone A, 2 is zone C, 1 baseline capacity replacement. During this time period, we didn't deny any pre-screening reviews and none were retracted by the applicant. And the final metric is that during that time period, Andy issued 1 Part 327 permit for a newer increased withdrawal over 2 MGD. Next slide. Okay, this graph shows withdrawals authorized. Top part in the green is authorized, registration authorized by the tool, 161. And the bottom blue-gray is SSRs, 117. Of those 117 SSRs, two were denied, 11 were retracted by the applicant, and another 13 were still pending at the time when we pulled this data report. Timeliness metrics, the average number of days to complete an SSR was 10.6, and 53% were done within the 10 business day deadline. The primary reason for that decline in our timeliness metric was 23 site-specific reviews that started out originally as incomplete applications from the former withdrawal initiative. We never, before that initiative was closed, we didn't get enough information to act on those. So then they were evaluated as if they were new withdrawals. All but 4 of those 23 ended up being denied. In turn, those 23 SSRs delayed the processing of another additional 4 SSRs that came in after those 23 in some of the same affected water management areas. Next slide.
So Jim, sorry, just to clarify then, since you had 19 of those 23 SSRs that ended up getting denied, right? That then forms the bulk of the denials that you had on that graph from outcomes of SSRs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, those top graph is the cumulative trend over time for the average number of business days. And the bottom graph is cumulative trend over time for percent of insights that are done within the 10 business days. Slide. This table shows our current Zone D water management areas. We recently added to this list an unnamed watershed water management area 12305, which is in the middle there in Oceana and Muskegon counties. That was because an accounting error was made back in 2015, which was recently corrected. And Eagle's going to be reviewing that water management area to see if we can make any further adjustments. Next slide. And that map shows the locations of the depleted water management areas, and the legends outlines follow-up actions that we're taking. So on the upper left there, 12305, that's that brand new one. Moving further south in Elgin, 11745, that's water management area that is split off from another water management area. And we're waiting on 2 auto pass registrations to be installed, and we're going to review those withdrawals and update as appropriate. Continuing further south in Van Buren and Cass counties, the Osborne Drain Water Management Area 19606. That's been referred for escalated enforcement actions, and pre-settlement negotiations are in progress. Up in the center there, Butterfield Creek. Saki, I think. We're continuing to collect stream flow measurements, and we'll verify that the index flow review is correct prior to contacting property owners to reduce pumping schedules. Moving further south in Saginaw County, 20950, we're collecting stream flow measurements to verify if the index flow review is correct, and as well as doing a geology review to see if any of those withdrawals might be isolated from surface water. Moving down to Calhoun County, Dickinson Creek, 3452. We're waiting for a model from a private consultant. Some withdrawals in the headwaters of that watershed. South Branch of the Kalamazoo, 10018. That's where we're collecting stream flow measurements. Then down in Monroe County, 7235, we've completed a review of the existing registrations, and we're doing the geology. Any questions?
Jim, if I understood you right, your program's taking on more responsibility for hydrogeologic reviews. Is that?
That's correct. What hydrologic studies have been doing, both hydrogeo study reviews and groundwater model reviews for resource permit applications. So things like creating a new inland lake under Part 301, or projects that might impact regulated wetlands under. So because of workload issues, that those do transferred over.
By Jill Scott, so that.
To address that, we're trying to create a new position modeler. In addition, we're working along with the Eagle groundwater technical team and the groundwater modeling TAPS and RRD. We're working on trying to develop the house groundwater modeling training curriculum so we can build our in-house capabilities, not only in WRD, but other divisions as well, because drinking water, for one, experience the same difficulty, experience. It's hard to find, hard to recruit experienced groundwater modelers for state positions. So we want to continue to try to recruit externally, but also build it in-house.
Question.
Tom Frazier's.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Just a quick question. I was curious as to the 327 permit that was issued. Wondered if you could share a little bit more on what that was for or who that was.
Let's see, Andy, are you on?
Yep, I am here. That was it was a construction dewatering withdrawal. I am searching real quick to find out exactly which one it was, but yep, temporary construction dewatering.
Brian, you've got a question here in the room too.
Go ahead.
All right, so Jim, you said on the last one of your reviews of the Zone B that you're going to be looking at the stream flow gauges. And I want to get back to what Dave there. So what do you was correct or Zone D was correct or no? What do you hope to accomplish?
Depends on the water management area. It might be start off with the original index flow. And may also area, there's a watershed in the thumb that's currently under the influence of high lake levels. For the hydrologic guidance on how to handle that situation.
So if that stream flow gauge shows that historically it is at the same flow that it always has been, regardless of what you're seeing on paper, does that stay in the D or do you modify it up because maybe some of the modeling has not been quite right to depict where we are at today, or is that a snapshot in time? That's where I'm trying to figure out when we go this, how does Eagle treat those situations?
If I understand your question correctly, if there's enough additional data since the original index flow review was done, see if they have enough data to revise the index flow and see what that number comes back as.
Yeah.
Then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of this is done based on theory and hypotheticals and modeling and where we think things are going to be. But after time, when you go out there and take a measurement and say, well, let's compare the stream flow gauge today, maybe as it was 10, 15 years ago, there has been no change, yet through modeling, it shows that this should be in a zone D. But yet the stream hasn't changed. That's where I'm kind of confused with, because we have had a lot of water lately. We've had a lot of rain, precipitation, lake levels up. That's where I'm just wondering from your perspective, do you keep it in that zone D? Or do you say, no, there's new evidence that we could raise this out of that? Or where does that go? That's where I'm curious as to how you treat those.
That would be a case where we'd have to take a deeper dive into figuring out what's going on. So reevaluate the geology, reevaluate the stream flow, look at, are there other violations, do a compliance review, other violations that are affecting that. There's probably multiple causes that need to be analyzed.
Thanks.
Any more questions for Jim?
Jim, I had a question too. I remember from a while ago, you had said that after the 2018 enactment of the alternative site-specific review process, that you had gotten in, I think the last time you reported 4 applications to that process. Eagle had denied those. Have you received any more since then? And can you talk about?
No, we haven't received any. And of those 4, the first 2 were ineligible because they were over 1 MGD. The third attempt was administratively incomplete, was closed. The applicant turned around, resubmitted a complete application. That went the full 25 days and ended up being denied for 2 reasons. One, that there wasn't enough flow available to authorize the withdrawal. The right groundwater model, but the specific errors in the way they did their model.
Okay, thanks.
Illich?
Jim, remember we talked about this last week, but particularly in those C and D zones, suggesting that we get more, if you will, stream gauges put in so that we can start looking at the data more critically, because we just don't have enough that we can look at it and deny the fact that, all right, hey, it's not something we had for the last 10 years, but we have to start doing something right away so we can start looking at it. Just my thoughts.
Agreed. So that's, yeah, we're anxiously waiting additional funding for the legislature. And that may, hopefully that will translate possibly into additional string gauges and also getting out there and doing additional miscellaneous flow measurements. Might possibly include installing additional monitor wells as well.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Jim on his presentation? Jim, thank you very much. We've kind of covered this a little bit, but our future meeting dates, we did talk about keeping our schedule consistent going forward. Second Tuesday of the month, same time frame. We're extending the meeting so that we're able to plan for a 3-hour meeting instead of a 2-hour meeting. We have looked at dates, and our hope is that we can have an in-person quorum before June. So I don't think we're ready to share the meeting dates here on the screen today, but I would watch your emails. We'll soon, dates will soon be emailed to everybody so we can get them in our calendar. Am I missing anything else there, Brian or Laura?
I think just generally that kind of as we did to produce the 2020 report, we'll plan on at some point, probably this summer, shifting from an every other month meeting schedule to an every month meeting schedule to make sure that we can get all our work done. So when we send out the email for the meeting dates, we're going to put in kind of ideally where we'd like to see those monthly meetings start. And also put an indication on, when are those kind of crucial pinch points that we think we really need to get an in-person quorum. And, again, it's 9 voting members. So, I want to be respectful of folks who have some specific challenges with being able to get here. But then also making sure that we can get our work done, because ideally our December meeting is just going to be congratulating ourselves over an awesome job done, fixing any very last minor things and hitting send.
Yeah, the agendas will be driven by meeting that report deadline. So, David Lush.
Thanks, Brian. I just want to point out that if the legislation holds as it's currently written, that is, if there are no shall we say, negative amendments coming out of the House, we will have a larger budget than we anticipated. And my question is vis-a-vis the report for this year, how we deal with that. It seems to me that we need to be talking in the council and perhaps in the committees ahead of time about potential expansion of some of the already existing recommendations. We tried to be parsimonious in our budget recommendations for the various recommendations, but we now need to look at, if we have more money available, which, if any, of the approved recommendations would get that money. And even if we do that, it seems to me we don't have to ask permission from the legislature. That's an administrative role of administering the money through the department. So that discussion needs to happen, and it's at least parallel to the report discussions and possibly interweaved with it.
Dave, good question. And if you remember from our advisory council meeting in October, we had reported out on the meeting that Brian and I had with Senator Probst's staff and some of the other Senate staffers working on that bill. What they had done at that time was they asked us to sort of project out future ongoing costs for some of those items, knowing that not, some of them have maintenance costs or, or continued, continued expenses that are coming in and that they're not just necessarily a one and done expense. So we had drawn up with the help of the implementation committee, had drawn up kind of just a rough, back end calculation on here's how much we would spend in 5 years, here's how much we would spend in 10 years. And so my understanding is that after they took that consideration back and discussed it with the bill sponsors, that, that's why that larger amount of money is in there, is because they're recognizing that with the recommendations that we made, yeah, we asked for, for a smaller amount of money up front, but then with the anticipation that we were going to come back and ask for more to keep these projects going. So yeah, that'll definitely be something we'll need to make sure and discuss and figure out, with instruction from the legislature and from people and working within the sideboards that we got of, how do we hold ourselves accountable and how do we make sure that we're getting done what we have recommended get done.
David, exactly the kind of problems we want to face, Dave.
Yeah, wonderful problem to have. I will point out though, because both in the models committee and today, we've talked about the absolute need for more on the ground monitoring with stream flow gauges. We have a good proposal that that Ralph administered for us, and he was trying to be as expansive as he could while still recognizing that we probably were under a budget constraint. I, for one, although I'm not a voting member of USPATI, would recommend that that's a place, for example, where rapid expansion, if extra, quote, extra monies, end quote, are available, should be put.
Noted. Thank you. Anybody else, any questions or comments on the meeting dates? Hearing none, I will move to the public comment section of this meeting. If there are any members of the public that would like to make a comment, the floor is open. Once again, public comment is open. I don't see any hands up here.
None in the room.
None in the room. At this time, we'll close the public comment timeline. And I think we are open for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We will we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate very, very much your time and all the work you're putting into it.